someone is wrongfully attributed to somebody, at the very least, it's like, no, that's not the nefs would like it because anything good that's attributed to you, the nefs would like it.
So you should just like say something.
Yeah, it's actually just not me. The person wants to remain anonymous, but I'm just it's not me.
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله. لا إله إلا الله 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 قد كفاني علم ربي من سؤالي واختياري فدعائي وابتهالي شاهد لي بافتقاري فلهذا السر أدعو في يساري وعساري أنا عبد صار فخري ضمن فقري واضطراري لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله يا إلهي ومليكي أنت تعلم كيف حالي وبما قد حل قلبي من هموم واشتغالي فتداركني بلطف منك يا مولى الموالي يا كريم الوجه غثني قبل أن يفنى اصطباري لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله يا سريع الغوث غوثا منك يدركني سريعا يهزم العسرى وياتي بالذي أرجو جميعا يا قريبا يا مجيبا يا عليما يا سميعا قد تحققت بعجزي وخضوعي وانكساري لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لم أزل بالباب واقف فارحمن ربي وقوفي وبوادي الفضل عاكف فأدم ربي عكوفي ولحسن الظن لازم فهو خلي وحليفي وأنيسي وجليسي طول ليلي ونهاري لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله حاجة في النفس يا رب فاقضها يا خير قاضي وأرح سري وقلبي من لظاها وشواظي في سرور وحبور وإذا ما كنت راضي فالهنا البسط حالي وشعاري والدثاري لا إله إلا الله 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 لا إله إلا الله.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Inshallah we will be settling into our next session in just a moment. If everyone could take their seats, bidnillah. If you needed to get refreshments, if we could come back into the main musalla for the next session. And just a note, if you do need to prepare yourself for Salat al-Asr, we will be praying right after this session, inshallah. So if you need to make preparations, it would be good to do so before we head into the session, so that as soon as we conclude the session, we can have Salat al-Asr, inshallah. So we'll begin in just a few moments. If we could kindly conclude our conversations, come into the musalla, we'll begin in just a moment. Barakallahu feekum. And as we do settle in, Assalamu alaikum. As we do settle in, if we could move closer to the front, please, and further to the right. So our sisters, inshallah, if we could also do the same, move closer to the front and also to the right, just to make space for those who are coming in, inshallah.
أهلا. When do you sneak in? When do you sneak in? When do you sneak in? Today? I'll send you.
Question?
It's quick because we're going to get stuck.
Yeah, I asked Sheikh Amjad. He wasn't sure what to say, so I said to ask you about the meaning of the statement which Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mubarak, where it says, إن كان الرجل يطوف بالبيت وهو بفرسان وكيف ذلك؟
صلى الله على محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم 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 يا حبيبي يا محمد يا عروس الخافقين يا مؤيد يا ممجد وضياء كل عيني صلى الله على محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم 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 يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So just before we get into the material, how's everybody doing? Quick check-in. Everybody doing okay? How's everybody processing what it is that we are learning? Everyone's doing okay? It is very deep material and consequential. Inshallah ta'ala, that what we hope to do in the interactive session is to try to go a little bit further in terms of understanding it and its implications. And while anyone could ask whatever it is that they are thinking about, I'm really hoping that because of the importance of this material that we can really focus on and go a little bit deeper. How do we relate to it? What are some of the questions that are going to naturally arise in terms of we want to tomorrow or whenever it is that we're leaving, have an understanding where then we know what the next step is. And how do we come back to this and to keep learning and to that further our knowledge of this fiqh al-batin, this fiqh, if you will, of the heart. So now that we've transitioned, because we're already on session number 6, essentially the first 4 sessions were about the first part of this book and the last 4 are about the second part of it. And so that when Imam al-Ghazali says that the love of wealth and the love of status are the rukna dunya, that are 2 pillars of this world. While there are certainly other desires, we've spoken about the hierarchy of shahawat and desires, and we always come back to that because it's so important to be aware of. These 2 are the biggest ones. These 2 are the ones where if we don't get these right, oh my goodness, there's a long list of destructive vices that will then potentially come into the heart. Jazakumullah khair. So as Tariq was bringing this, our brother Sheikh Faraz Rabbani, may Allah protect him, one time when I was in Canada, and I didn't know if he was joking at first with the title or serious, but made me speak on coffee and the purpose of life. So we already took a big tangent in last session about the purpose of life. We don't want to do it again, but there is a relationship between coffee and the purpose of life. And it's actually a fairly easy syllogism to understand. So how does coffee relate to the purpose of life? So we said that the purpose of life is to know Allah. And the way that we come to know Allah is by worshiping Him in the broadest sense of that meaning. And coffee gives you the strength that you need to worship Allah. So coffee gives you the strength that you need to worship Allah If you worship Allah sincerely, you fulfill your purpose of life. So it's a very easy syllogism. So coffee relates to the purpose of life. What a blessed substance. And in fact, they used to say actually, especially in Hadramaut, Yemen was the first place they cultivated coffee. They used to say that there's 3 blessings upon the muta'akhirin, the people who came later. And the diwan of Sheikh Omar Makharma, which is a famous diwan that has so many meanings. The Sharh of Ibn Abbad, the great scholar from Morocco, who is buried in Fez, Morocco, upon the Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah. And then Al-Qahwat al-Bunniya, coffee. In other words, is that because they didn't have the same himma and aspiration of the people who came before them, coffee that replaced that and helped them get the strength that they needed to worship Allah. Everything in moderation is good. And but what a blessed substance when you make the right intention behind it. There's even a Fatiha for coffee. And then there's another beautiful story. And there's books where they speak about coffee as if it's their long-lost beloved. They write mystical poetry about her because it's actually feminine, but it's a substance. And one of them saw the Prophet ﷺ in a dream. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to take a hadith from you without any intermediary. So this is not a real hadith, right? This is a dream. But it is possible that someone sees the Prophet and he speaks to him directly, and this is possible. So this is a dream, so it's not a hadith, just to clarify. And then the Prophet ﷺ spoke to him. He said that for someone to hold a subha, whether they remember Allah with it or not, will be written from those who remember Allah often. And then, as long as the scent of coffee is on someone's tongue, because when you really good coffee, that the notes just keep coming out. That's why they have notes, and most of us don't know what they mean. It takes like a master tester to figure out what those notes actually really mean. But we kind of get an idea of what we like and don't like. But good coffee actually remains on your tongue 20, 30 minutes sometimes. Anyhow, as long as the scent of coffee is on the tongue, the angels make istighfar for you and seek forgiveness for you. And then to visit a wali min awliya'illah, the time it takes to milk a goat or cook an egg is better for you than a lot of worship. And so in other words, the whole point is this is obviously someone who's drinking coffee for the right reasons and is not burning themselves out. It can cause health problems to you if you do anything in excess and so forth. So all those disclaimers aside, coffee is a beautiful thing. Bismillah. So if anybody needs some, tafaddalu. All right, let's get to work. So we still have quite a bit to do. And in this session, inshaAllah ta'ala, we'll be looking at the haqiqah, the true nature of ostentation. Okay, and as Ustad Amjad that transitioned into the discussion of riya, he talked about its blameworthy nature. And again, what we want to have ensue from that is to know, just as when we think of jah, status, there's a danger here. And we need to protect ourselves, because if we're not careful, it could draw us into the ranks of Pharaoh without us realizing it. And if we use it for the right reasons, it could actually be a source of great good. So it requires knowledge, but knowledge itself is not enough. We also need a state. And when we talk about a state, what we really mean by that is self-control. And this is one of the greatest traits of all that someone can possibly learn. And in fact, even in a very outward sense, for even people who are not Muslim, of all of the traits, and this is scientifically proven, it is the one that predicts our worldly happiness the most, is self-control. Self-control is of the utmost importance. And there are certainly people that can have a degree of self-control who are not even Muslim, but a Muslim has a much deeper understanding of what that actually really means because of the framework and how we understand it. The nafs and the hawa, that our soul, our ego, and its desires, and then everything that relates to the internal dimension of the human being. We have a very deep understanding of that. and very practical guidance on how it is that we can deal with it. And we will see some of this come to the surface in the last session that will be tomorrow, where we talk about the treatment. So, but we want to know what riya really is. And so we start with its definition. And this is where Imam al-Ghazali says, radiyallahu anhu, أَنَّ رِيَاءَ مُشْتَقٌ مِنَ الرُّؤْيَا. So riya, ostentation, linguistically or lexically, it is derived from ru'ya, which is a vision, that you see something. Okay, and what happens is when you put it on the third form, it relates to something to do with seeing between you and another person, i.e. is that you want them to see you, you want to be seen. Here, not in the sense that normally are saying that nowadays, like, oh, I feel so heard, or I feel so seen. No, in the sense that you are doing something for someone else, wanting their approval and praise. And then another synonym for the same phenomenon is sum'a, which we might translate slightly differently as reputation, but they go hand in hand. Remember, we mentioned all of those words in the beginning? And actually, let me just repeat those, because this is going to become important, because not everybody was here on that first night. So these words all are important. They all overlap to a certain degree. Status, rank, standing, position, renown, fame, celebrity, stardom, popularity, notoriety, reputation, name, influence, validation, approval, recognition. All of these words that relate to this topic. And so you could start to see here is this template that Imam al-Ghazali is giving us, even though in and of itself is 200 pages, this could very easily be brought out into several hundred pages, very easily. And especially if you used that evidence-based research to help you in this, it could be even drawn out even further. And this is what we need people to do, in fact. And this is what I've seen my own teachers do. And I've been in classes where they've rooted themselves in the core concepts of Imam al-Ghazali's ethical theory, and it was particularly when one of them was given a commentary on Book 22, which is a book on disciplining the soul, and then they started adding things. And I'd read the book and spent some time with it, so I knew it wasn't in the book. And I'm here in this class like, he's adding this. And it's like amazing how he's adding this, and he's adding to the theory and making it even deeper. And unfortunately, I never had access to those recordings because I wanted to write that all down and I couldn't remember everything. But this is the way these things work, is that this is scholarship he's putting forth, and no one has done the likes of what he did before him or after him. But there's still plenty of room to bring this into the modern world where we can understand our challenges, which the archetypes are all the same of the past, but there's ways that we can articulate these meanings and that we can make connections with meanings that have risen to the surface as the result of research. And so this is very possible. If someone would root themselves in the religious meanings, but then also be exposed to the modern research. And so he says, sum'a is mushtaqqa min as-sama'. So reputation, sum'a, it's the same root word as sami'a. Sama' is about hearing. So the idea of seeing and hearing. And when people hear about you, and then they praise, they see you, and they notice things in you and so forth. So the whole meaning of the words themselves and what riya is relates to people seeing you and hearing about you. وإنما الرياء أصله طلب المنزل في قلوب الناس بإيرائهم خصال الخير. Okay? He says the foundation of riya, what is it? Ostentation is seeking a manzila, that seeking a station in the hearts of people by displaying to them good things that you do. So what is the foundation of riya? Talab al-manzila, seeking a rank, a station, fi qulub al-nas, in the hearts of people, bi'ira'ihim, by showing them khisal al-khair, displaying to them the good traits that you have, the good things that you do. إلا أن الجاه والمنزلة تطلب في القلب بأعمال سوى العبادات وتطلب بالعبادات. However, is that this standing and this status and the station that we seek in the heart, it's done through actions that are classified as acts of worship and acts that are classified as non-worship. So you have acts that are clearly worship and the acts that are not worship. And we had a nice little practice session with the young. You'd be surprised how, mashallah, smart some of your children are. The 10 to 14-year-olds, both the young men and women, they were getting it, mashallah. We were giving a right to them very simply, and they were getting it. Right. And we never underestimate. They might not be able to understand the details of everything that's in the Ulumuddin itself because they're a little bit younger, but they can understand the core meanings. You'd be so surprised. They get it. So then he says, وَاسْمُ الرِّيَاء مَخْصُوصٌ بِحُكْمِ الْعَادَةِ بِطَلَبِ الْمَنْزِلَةِ فِي قُلُوبِ الْعِبَادَاتِ وَإِظْهَارِهَا. When we speak about riya as a vice, as a destructive vice, as a disease of the heart, it specifically refers to the station that we're seeking in people's hearts by displaying acts of worship. So it doesn't relate to acts of non-worship. In other words, is that we mentioned the example of the basketball court. Okay, so if someone is showing off on the basketball court, or whatever sport that someone's playing, on the soccer field, or whatever, or in some worldly thing that they do, whatever it is that they do, that's not haram. It doesn't mean it is good, we'll get to it, but that in of itself is not haram. And not necessarily the best thing to do. We'll get into the details of it, but that is not what is referred to here. It's for worship, is where it becomes impermissible. So that can, that's a little bit of a sigh of relief. If someone is showing off in some worldly thing, khalas. But what we are going to talk about is how that doesn't mean that it's good, because if you accustom and habituate yourself to that, how are you going to make the distinction? It becomes difficult to do so. So he says there, فَحَدُّ الرِّيَاء. If we're going to give riya a definition, هو إرادة العباد بطاعة الله عز وجل. It is wanting approval from Allah's servants through the worship of Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what riya is. Very simple definition. What is it? إرادة العباد. Your intention is directed towards people and their approval, their validation, their praise, a station in their heart through obedience, which is supposed to only be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is the essence of what riya is. So this is actually very helpful, so we don't have to sit there and ponder and philosophize over what riya is. It's very clear what it is. And now think about the converse, which is, what is sincerity? Sincerity is simply seeking closeness to Allah, seeking Allah only, seeking closest to Allah only through every act that is that we do. That's what sincerity is. So it's the opposite. And so anything that we seek other than Allah in any act that we do, and usually it's going to be one of two things: either the approval of people or money or something worldly. That's it. And if you go back and scrutinize your own intentions, it's going to inevitably come back to one of these two. What does that do? That's super helpful. So we don't remain in this state where like, oh my God, what is it? What is it now? It's super simple. It's very clear what it is, and it's very clear what it isn't. And now that we know that, we can start checking ourselves and sifting through our intentions. What did I intend by this? And it's very simple. It's either going to be for the sake of people or for something worldly like wealth, or it's going to be for the sake of Allah. And the thing is, there's no middle ground where you're in a no man's land. In other words, we're either working for the sake of Allah or we're working for the sake of the dunya. And even people who say, no, I'm not really making an intention, then your intention is by default worldly. You can't be in an area where it's like, oh, it's not this or that. It's one of the two. And so the vast majority of people in the world who are not believers, their intention is restricted to the world, and they don't even know it. And you'd be surprised what is crystal clear for a believer through the nur of ilm, the light of knowledge. There could be someone who spends 70 years of the life, and it's utterly ambiguous and unclear. Allah makes it clear to the believer. And then the more clarity that we have, the more like we are to put it into practice in a way that is pleasing to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what riya is. It's to do something for other than the sake of Allah. To seek people and their approval and their praise. To do it for them or something worldly. Okay, then he does this characteristically Imam al-Ghazali thing, which is, this is beautiful because you can see how he's done this throughout, especially in the Mu'amalat and Fiqh books, where they talk about, the muwakkal, and then the muwakkal or the wakil, and then the muwakkal, all these different terms that they use for the different transactions in a fiqh sense. So he breaks it down similarly in terms of riya. So he says you have the mura'i, which is the one who is actually doing this one showing off, and the one who is ostentatious. Who al-abode is the worshipper himself. And then you have the al-mura'a lahu. You have the people that he is showing off for. Okay, and these are the people that he's trying to impress and gain rank in their heart. And then you have the mura'a bihi. You have what it is that you show off with. So you have the one who's showing off. You have those that you're showing off for. You have the things that you are showing off with. And then you have riya, which is the actual act of showing off itself. He doesn't leave leaves no stone unturned, radiallahu anhu. And so the next thing we're going to go to for clarity is what we show off with. And it's a limited amount of things. You can limit it to 5 things. The body, the physical body, our clothes, words, yani things that we say, deeds, things that we do, and people. The first 4 relate to us and in and of ourselves. And then the 5th one relates to something outside of us, which is other people. And so the first one is, in most of the examples that he gives are examples that were likely to happen in previous times, but they still could happen in our time as well. About the physical body. And so he says that if someone intentionally wants people to see them as getting a little bit skinny, the color of their skin changing colors, and that noticing that there's dryness in their lips because they fast so much, or the classic one is like that nice little sajda mark, right there in the middle of the forehead. Got to rub it in a little bit when you go down into sujood to make sure that it's a nice mark. That's a person of tahajjud. Look at my mark is not as big as his, right? This type of stuff. And that also relates to how is that we speak, that we try to be super righteous and just speak really quietly, right? And act like just, I'm a very calm person, right? And so forth and so on. So anything that relates to our physical body. And again, it might be slightly different in previous times than it is in our times. But there's ways that we show off with our physical body in a religious sense, just as there's ways that we show off in a worldly sense. And the funny thing is here, he says, أَمَّا أَهْلَ الدُّنْيَا, the people of this world, فَيُرَاءُونَ بِإِظْهَارِ السَّمَنِ. I thought this was so funny. Is that if someone was a little bit overweight in the pre-modern world, it was a sign that they were well-to-do. So it was a sign of status. If you're a little bit overweight, meaning you're eating well, right? Now, that's not necessarily the best thing, health-wise, but the point is here, just the fact that he mentioned that, right? So he mentions a number of examples. For us, that's very simple. And it's different than it is for women or men. Is that there's a certain way that men want to look. And especially we're dragged into this image culture in which we live. There's a way that men want to look that's associated with strength, and especially their physical strength. And there's a way that women want their figures to look so that other people notice them in a certain way. And if people are trying to act like this is not important to them, they're lying. There's very few people that are not concerned about the physical way that they look, their features and their haircuts, and how they carry themselves, and that the way that they take care of themselves, and so forth and so on, and the way that that we are obsessed with this, unfortunately. And the greater the celebrity of culture that we live in, the more pressure it is to look a certain way. And so living in major metropolitan areas, there's more pressure. And there's pressure everywhere it is that you go. So the people of the world show off through their physical bodies. Now, I'm not saying to neglect your physical, but we should really think about, and the criterion here is, how are we when we look in the mirror? If you want to know where we're at in terms of this, how are we when we look into the mirror? What is our etiquette of looking in the mirror? Just really think about this. I'm not asking anyone to blurt out any answers. Just really think about, how do I look in the mirror? And how do I respond when I see what I see in the mirror, which is you? And this will tell you a lot about your deen, and a lot about what you need to work on. And his whole point here is that for a brother to be overly obsessed with his physical strength and how he looks, and that his biceps and the size of his chest and his six-pack and so forth and so on, and his nice hairdo that is very carefully crafted and so forth, is in taking pictures at different angles to make sure they just see the right angle, and that's the one that goes out, and so forth. That's not necessarily haram, right? It's not haram to do that, because you're not showing off with worship, right? But his whole point, this is what people of dunya do, right? And unless someone has another intention behind that, and again, we're just speaking at a surface level here, whether or not people should do that or not, that's a slightly different question. Maybe we can talk about that more in the interactive session. But certainly there's things that we can do, even religiously, where our intention is that manifest on our physical body, that actually becomes a form of showing off. And then secondly, our clothes. And he says that in a traditional society, there were actually people who wore more simple clothes because there were so many people associated with piety who wore simple clothes. So you could actually show off by the clothes that you wear. But then the opposite is true too. There were other people who noticed that certain well-known people in society, which in traditional societies tended to be religious people, is that they tried to dress like them, in a sense, show off in terms of how the clothes that they wear. My advice when it comes to clothes is, number one, wear what is permissible. That's the first criterion. And then after that, the closer that we are to hayat, to modesty, the better. So, permissibility, hayat, and then what you feel comfortable with, based upon what you have to do from your day to day. The point is, set aside dressing for the sake of other people. Do what is permissible. Is going to differ for men and women. Do what is that closer to hayat, the better. That's the principle. And then that dress accordingly. Different people have that different times where they have to wear different things. And then keep it real, keep it natural. His whole point here is don't show off through them. Now, but he says, as for the people of the dunya, is that this is how they show off, is through their clothes. Think about the club culture and the way that people deck themselves out, and celebrities, and the way they dress up for their parties and their award ceremonies, and the athletes that strut into the locker room. You get these pictures of them and what they're decked out and what they're wearing and so forth and so on. And their homes and the cars that they drive. So your clothes, and by extension, anything external to you. So just think about the way people show off through this. Now, it's not haram to buy a super nice car and to speed out of the parking lot, which is probably not the best thing to do and maybe not the safest, but you're not doing anything haram by doing that. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily good either. And his point is to make us aware of these things. And again, if even these things that are worldly, that are not necessarily haram, that pertain to dress or anything external to us, once you condition yourself to that, it's very hard then to draw the line of separation when it comes to worship. Then comes our words. Okay? And so that there's people that show off. Some people have the gift to gab. They're very good speakers. And they know that they can influence people because of how they speak. And so that they show off in terms of what it is that they say. And they show off their knowledge. They show off what they know. Whether they be in a teaching capacity or whether they're reminding someone of something, and so forth and so on. And they show what they know. It's not really necessary to meet, but they mention who they're with and how, and so forth and so on. And they know that these things have an impact, and they understand that you say certain things, and they know how to withdraw responses from people and so forth. And again, there's a fine line here, because you can do some of those same things for the right reasons, but a person, he goes into great detail about this later on, if someone is teaching, if they're a public speaker, if they are a teacher, you have to be very careful about what you present publicly and what is your intention. Is your intention genuinely to benefit people, or is it to show off? Because you want people to praise you. If it's to show off, la latif, very dangerous. And he gives us a criterion for that. And the criterion is, let's just say the next person that speaks after you, or someone else that is also teaching, if when you hear them, they're actually even better than you are in terms of how you teach and how you speak. In your heart, you're just, there's istithqal. It's heavy for you. Or that you have envy for that person because you're like, oh, he's going to affect people more than me. Allahu Akbar. That means your intention is rotten. So see, if someone else is more eloquent than you and has more impact upon people, if they're saying the right thing and they're benefiting people, if that's your goal, which it should be that people benefit, then why are you envious? It means that you're actually doing it for people. You're not doing it for Allah. If you were doing it for Allah, you would be happy that Allah Ta'ala brought that on someone else's tongue to benefit people. So he gives us this. He's a master at this. You could write a whole risala treatise about the signs of various realities with how we know whether we're true in this or not. He does it over and over again through the Yahya, and that's one of them. So as for the people of this world, again, it was different in previous times. There's a way that they speak. Again, people can show off in a worldly sense, in speaking in a certain way, using certain language and so forth. Again, as long as it's within the realm of what is permissible, in some of these ways of expression are more attractive to people than others, it doesn't mean that takes you outside the fold of something that we can do, unless the way that we speak. And when it comes to words, the most important thing is the meanings. The most important thing of all. If the meanings are questionable, no matter whether you say that with something of some type of sound or not, I'm not going to use the word music because then people are, going to categorize you in a certain way. But if the most important thing are the lyrics, this would be my advice to you, if you end up letting your children listen to things that have drums or maybe even other types of instruments, I would say the most important thing of all, I'm not telling people what to do or not do, are the lyrics. If the lyrics are not good, there is no justification for it whatsoever, even if there's nothing musical about it. The words have to be right. That's the most important thing. And after that, there's degrees of what is permissible or then better. But having said all of that, try this at home. Try this in your local communities. If you get your children used to hearing beautiful spiritual poetry from the earliest age. So what they sing at home is Mawlaya salli wa sallim da'iman abadan ala habibika khayr al-khalqi kullihim ya nabi, singing that verses from that, singing this. If you get them used to that, they're going to be conditioned from an early age not even to like some of this demonic music that is going to bring darkness to their heart. Because it's fulfilling that human need for sound, and then you found a good replacement for it, an alternative. And you can test this in your own home, especially if you get them early enough so that they get attracted to those sounds before they start hearing this demonic music. They're naturally going to dislike that. They're going to cringe because so much of this music, even if some of it might be, with the weakest of opinions, somewhat permissible, still that it's ego inciting. Whereas that beautiful spiritual, that poems, they calm the nafs and they bring out the higher dimensions of the heart. So words, and then we have deeds. So this is really where it starts to come to the surface, especially the negative type of riyat that he's referring to here. So where that you prolong your prayers, you prolong your prostrations, you lower your head, and that you make sure that everything that is that you do with the utmost etiquette and so forth. And you tend to do that more when people are around as opposed to them not being around. When you're alone, you neglect a lot of things. When people are around, you go out of your way to make sure that you do all of these things right. And especially if you know that you're going to be the one who's leading the prayer and so forth. He's saying that all of these things, if we are seeking people's approval through doing all of this, then khalas. This is a type of riya. So this is the fourth thing that we show off with is our deeds. And then the people of the dunya have their own way of doing that. And he mentions here like how they walk, the strut, and the way that they carry themselves, and the way that they pose for pictures, and their body language, and these types of things. Is that there's a way that the people of this world that walk, right? There's a way and certain men walk. There's a way that certain women walk. And it's like as if, that's what people actually do. They actually study these people to be like them. They want to look just like them. What are the new trends? People buy these magazines. They watch these videos. And they're just like literally trying to be just like them and look like them and dress like them and walk like them. And this is a serious problem if these people are misguided. And then finally with people. And so here he talks about your friends, the people who visit you, and the people that you spend time with. There are people that show off through this. Okay, so the fact that you mention, oh, I went to so-and-so's house, or I got to meet so-and-so, or I spent time with so-and-so. And then a lot of people will put these pictures up, is that taking a picture with this person, or that person, and so forth. And Yani, some of it is innocent at a basic level if it's really there, but my point is check your intention. Why am I posting that picture with so-and-so on my social media? Now, wanting to take the picture so you have a memory, that's totally fine. You know, we all like to see pictures of ourselves with people that we like and that we associate with righteousness. There's nothing wrong with that. But posting it, what is your intention? Don't just post it for the sake of posting it. And this is the way that some people do it, is that this is a way to become an influencer. Oh, he's with him, he spent time with him and her, and people are like, oh, that person wouldn't be special if they weren't that person must be special because they're spending time with these famous people. So again, you have to check yourself. Why am I doing what it is that I do? So people can actually show off through the people that they mix with, and then they name drop. Right? And fulan, and oh, I just was with so-and-so last week. Oh, I was just with so-and-so last week. People are like, oh, wow, you get to meet so many amazing people. And then, because you know when you name drop like that, they look at you like, oh, wow, that means if you're with them and they're special, that must mean that you're also special. So you got to be careful. You got to be careful. The foundation of this is you do it for Allah. Right? And you know, this is not for people. This is the classic selfie in front of the Kaaba or while you're in Tawaf and so forth. And again, check your intention. I'm not saying that everybody don't go around it. Oh, that person posted that means that they're showing off. Don't assume not. No, we're obliged to have a good opinion of people. No, our opinion of them is they did that to haddathu min ni'matillah. They wanted to show Allah's blessing upon them, and they wanted to encourage people that were in their social media, had their social media feed, to also do that. That very well could be their intention, and we're obliged to have that. So we're obliged to have that good opinion. So I'm not saying you go around having a bad opinion of people. But if you're going to do that, check yourself. What is my intention in doing this? Okay? And then, of course, the people of the dunya, they all do this. Just look at what's out there. Don't look at what's out there. Everything that we know that's out there. Okay? So these are the 5 things that we show off with. And then Imam al-Ghazali speaks about the different types of ostentation. This is where you can see his genius, right? And he says that there are وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَقْنَعْ بِحُسْنِ الْإِتِقَادَاتِ فِيهِ. And there are some people who, it's a type of ostentation, all they want is for people to think that they are special. That's their goal. And the scary thing here is, many of these people might not even be around people a lot. So it's possible to show off in your worship and not even be around people a lot. Because showing off is about your intention and motivation. And so this can manifest when you're with people. And it's one of the most subtle forms of riya, and all forms of riya are subtle, where you expect special treatment because of what you do, what you know about yourself privately. You expect special treatment. And one of the most beautiful stories I've ever heard in my life was one of the mashaykh, who was the sheikh of some people here, and a well-known sheikh of our time. And he was at a retreat, which was his retreat. But one of the people serving there didn't know that he was the sheikh. And so part of the tartib was they were all in circles learning the Quran, reciting the Quran. And the sheikh, who was extremely humble, was sitting to the side. And one of the brothers who was serving comes up and says, "Brother, would you please join the Quran circle?" And he didn't know that he was the sheikh of everyone who was there, so he just politely declined and so forth. And he comes back, he says, "Brother, you have to join the Quran circle. This is what everyone does." So he goes with the sheikh and has the sheikh. The sheikh doesn't say anything. He goes and he joins the Quran circle. And then he ends up trying to correct him, even with his recitation, which didn't need correction. And then the session ends and the sheikh didn't say anything. Just obliged and joined the Quran circle and, was being corrected and didn't say anything and was responding and so forth. And then they were praying after that. And the sheikh usually prefers other people to lead the prayer. So someone else was leading the prayer. And then after the prayer, the imam turned and asked the sheikh to make the dua. And then the person who had asked the sheikh to join the Quran circle said, "Wait a second. Why is he asking him to make the dua after the prayer?" So then he started to ask, and he realized that it was the sheikh. And then he just felt, La hawla wa la quwwata billah, what did I do? But the point of the story is what? The sheikh doesn't think like, "Oh, I'm the sheikh." Right? There was no nafsi response. He called him brother, like, "Yeah, I'm your brother." Right? If someone calls us brother, if you're bothered by your title, why did he call me? He didn't call me sheikh. He only called me ustad or sidi or whatever. Right? Ish hada. That is, something's wrong, yani, if we're worried about titles. Yes, I get the argument that it's important to have distinctions and so forth, and I'm not necessarily against them, but I prefer I'm your brother, khalas. We're brothers and sisters trying to do our best. There are real shuyukh that we call sheikh. There's real criterion for sheikhs, true. But you got to be careful with this stuff because it goes to people's head, and then they expect to be addressed in a certain way. Where this sheikh was totally fine with someone calling him brother and just entered into the halaqah, didn't say anything. And would never have said anything to anyone. He wouldn't go and be like, "Who was that person? Can someone go find out who that was?" they didn't recognize who I am. You're not a sheikh if you think like that. You're not really a sheikh. Even if you have a lot of knowledge, you can't be if that's how you're viewing these things. And you'd be surprised, Ya Allah, subhanallah. There's some things that happen on the back end that it's better not to tell people. And people are people, so people have things that they're dealing with and so forth. But the leaders, for lack of a better word, community leaders, people are, a leader is a leader to good, is that they have to be people who have an attachment to the spiritual path, or leadership is destructive. It's very serious. And that after having a political position, sometime of imara or wilaya, the next most dangerous is to be in a state of qada, where you're like a judge of some sort. And then after that is to be a teacher. And some of the same dangers that exist in having some type of political position exist in being a teacher. And so you have to be very careful and to make sure that someone's intent. And the point of this is not that everybody leaves it, is that there's a standard that is set and that we understand what those are. So he says there's some who are just fine for people to regard them highly. Okay? He said, and then there are some people, ومن المرائين من لا يقنع بقيام منزله بل يلتمس مع ذلك إطلاق اللسان بالثناء والحمد. Not only do they want to have a station in someone's heart, they want people to praise them. So they crave people's praise. They just love it when they're mentioned highly and people mention their accolades. And this is Professor so-and-so or Sheikh, Doctor, or whatever. And then this person's done this and this and these things we put in our bios and just loving it. And oh, this person must be an expert. And then he goes up to speak, right? You got to be careful with this. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَرِيدْ انْتِشَارَ الصِّيدْ فِي الْبِلَادِ لِتَكْثُرَ. There are people who want their reputation to spread all over the place. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يُرِيدْ الْإِشْتِهَارَ عِنْدَ الْمُلُوكِ. Some people want to be known by the muluk, or the kings, political figures. Because in those times, if you were close to them, there's a lot of perks. And to some degree, it's still true. Okay? So that if you have, this is like a person who wants to be known so they can have good connections. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't establish connections as a community to take care of our needs. We have to, but be principled. We don't do it for the sake of doing it or for the sake that for people to praise us to do it. So you get this point? This is to wake us up to see how this works. And he says, then there are people who want status for worldly reasons so that they can earn money. And then there are people who seek status to do all different types of haram, wa'udhu billah, fawahish of different sorts, wa'udhu billah. And those are some of the worst of people. So then he poses this question. And the question is, I'm just going to do a time check here. Okay, good. I was like, if we have till 5, this is a problem. We got till 5:15. Should we take a deep breath? Everyone doing okay? Late Asr, 4th session of the day. Don't worry, we have dinner after this. The interactive session was a little bit lighter. And then dhikr in the evening. This is the tail end of the heavy lifting. And then it's going to get easier. All right, bismillah. So those are the different types of ostentation. And then we come to the legal ruling of ostentation. Okay? And so that if someone were to say, is riya haram, makruh, disliked, or mubah, or permissible, or fihi tafsil, or does it depend on the circumstance? He says it depends on the circumstance. Whoops. He says that you can do this, you can seek a station in someone's heart, either through something that is an act of worship or non-worship. Okay? And he says that the khalasa is, when it comes to seeking standing for things that don't relate to worship, is al-mura'a bima laysa min ibadat qad takun mubaha. There's times where it's permissible, and that there's times where it is somewhat blameworthy, depending upon what our intention is behind it. Okay? And so, if someone in a type of competition is just showing someone that they got skill on the soccer field, that seems to be something that is kind of permissible. It's not that big of a deal, as long as someone doesn't go to extremes in it, and that their goal is to help their team win the game, something like that. Okay, that might be an example of something that in sports is not that big of a deal. Or let's just say someone is showing to people that they have a very good product. And so they're advertising it well. And they're showing their degree of craftsmanship. You're showing off in that sense, but there's nothing really wrong with that, because you want people to have confidence that they're buying a good product. So that's permissible. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, you can still make a better intention than just showing off there. Your intention doesn't have to be simply for them to buy that product. You could go deeper, which is more ideal, which is if your work is an extension, and when we were talking about your why, your individual purpose, which is ideal, if your work is an extension of your purpose, then what is your intention in your work? You can make an intention to fulfill a fard kifaya and to do something that is of benefit, where you also get an intention for something that is recommended. And then you putting it out there that you're skilled at what you do, then it directly relates to your purpose, because you know if you do that, then people will be comfortable with you. So even the great scholars like Imam al-Ghazali, the introductions to the books are extremely eloquent. It's called a dibaja. In Arabic, it's bara'at al-istihlal. And it's permissible to do for them to show you are in the hands of a master. Okay? So that if someone is going to a physician and they're extremely confident, which you want them to be, and they tell you, I've done this operation 5,000 times, and we have a 95% success rate, and that calms the patient down. That's good. Now, if the person's intention is to, this is not worship, because what we mean by worship is direct worship. If the person's intention is to show off, that's blameworthy in that sense. You're just showing off for the sake of showing off because you want to be praised for it. But it's not necessarily haram, but it's borderline blameworthy. Now, if your intention is that you want that person to calm down and to feel safe and to quell their fears, that's noble. You actually get reward for doing that. So you're showing off, yani, that you're skillful. You're a good dentist. You're a good physician. You're a good lawyer. You're a good investor. You're a good whatever. And so that they trust you, and you're not lying. You're telling the truth. And you're doing it with the intention to help someone, to bring benefit to someone. That's actually, you get a reward for something that's recommended. As opposed, you see where it gets very subtle? Two people could do the exact same thing. For someone, it's blameworthy, borderline makruh. For someone else, you get a reward for it. And it all gets back to, what is the intention? And outwardly, no one knows. That's why you can't say that someone did things for the wrong reason. It gets very subtle. And thus, with everything that relates to that worldly things, okay, he says, but you have to be very careful here. And he says, this is where he says, is that status is like wealth. Okay? And so he says here that seeking wealth in and of itself, seeking status in and of itself, is that you can't say that it is haram. He says, but how are you seeking wealth and how are you seeking status? If you're seeking wealth or status in an unlawful way, it takes the hukm, the ruling of the wasila, the means of what you're doing. So if you're doing things impermissible to earn wealth or gain status, khalas, throw it out. That's blameworthy. Okay? And so he says here, you can see these two in the same way. And he says that earning amount of wealth that you need to take care of your worldly affairs is a praiseworthy thing. And likewise, maintaining your reputation to the degree that you need to conduct your worldly affairs is praiseworthy. And this is what Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam said, Inni hafidhun alim. And he said this to let him know that he was trustworthy and he had the requisite knowledge to be entrusted with his job. And of course that he was a prophet. He says, but what we have to recognize is that wealth as well as status is that it could turn into deadly poison, or it could be something that is beneficial. And so Imam al-Ghazali, remember who talks about, he said the likeness is like a snake. Is that imagine a deadly snake and you holding it and extracting venom from its fangs, right? And then putting just the right amount of that venom with the other ingredients that you need so that it becomes a medicine. The process of extraction is dangerous. And then the right mixture, just the right amount is dangerous. And a little bit more and it can kill you, a little bit less that it becomes something that saves your life. So this is what it means to be a fitna. And then you can't bypass it completely because we need money and we need standing and status. Again, this is why it's a fitna. And so then he says here, thus is the same state with status. فكما أن كثير المال يلهي ويطغي وينسي ذكر الله تعالى والدار الآخرة فكذلك كثرة الجاه. We have to remember is that if we're not careful in terms of how we acquire wealth, that if we don't regulate it, if we put too much emphasis on this, it will distract us and it will cause us to transgress and make us forget the remembrance of Allah and the abode of the hereafter. So what happens is that it will distract us, yulhi, cause us to transgress, yutghi, and then it will cause us to forget, yunsi, dhikrullahi ta'ala. And the same thing with ja. Bal inna fitnat ja a'zam min fitnat al-mal. The fitna of status is even greater than the fitna of wealth. And again, he said this multiple times. And when Imam al-Ghazali doesn't really repeat himself much, so when these things come up in every class and we keep reading it, he means intentionally to repeat this, because if I tell you something over and over and over again, right? I think of our house and how many times the cats got outside, and the amount of times I heard, close the door, 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 right? You hear that so many times, it's like wired in you that now I don't even have cats in the house. I'm like, wait, did I close the door? Emphasis impacts us, Yani. I'm going to get in trouble for that one when I get home. Anyhow, what he says here is, just as at the same time, you can't say that someone who wants to make money and earn a lot of money, what they're doing is haram. So no one's saying that's haram. And nor can we look at someone else like, you dunya-wee person, I just went to the Al-Maqasid retreat, and all you do is you want money, something wrong with you, da, da, da. Don't jump to that conclusion. Because you don't know where that person's at. That actually might be better for that person in terms of where they're at in their deen. So don't judge so quickly. And what's good for you is not, what's good for someone else is not necessarily what's good for you. And where someone's at, that actually might be a lesser of the two evils. Because if that person wasn't trying to make money, they might be doing something else. So this requires nuance and balance. So this does not mean we go out and judge other people. No, we worry about ourselves. And maybe that person has the right intention, or maybe that's what's getting that person out of a very bad habit, the fact they're just trying to make money. So making a lot of money, wanting to make money himself is not haram. And in fact, if you make the right intention, it could actually be a great thing to do with certain conditions. Or it could be something that is disliked or something that's permissible. So there's degrees here. And so he says, likewise, is that seeking status, a lot of status in and of itself is not necessarily haram. In and of itself. So you're just a connector. You just like to have a lot of friends. You know a lot of people. And you just take pictures with so and so and so on. So you connect this person, that. Some people are just super social butterflies. They're like this. And they know people all over the world, and they keep in contact with these people, just how they are. That's not necessarily haram, and there's some people that are just very recluse by nature. And a lot of it has to get back to our temperament. And this is a whole other level of this. Imagine mapping the virtues and the vices on the map of temperament. And the idea of knowing yourself, that would be deep. And there's so many ways that we could further the scholarship in our time. That would be deep and extremely helpful. Because once you kind of know your personality or your temperament, you will know what virtues and vices you are more susceptible to and less susceptible to. And it could be used as a template to help you figure out what your faults are and then how you go about working on them. And ultimately, what we all want is balance. But again, we're not going to cover everything in a weekend retreat in only 8 classes. This is why we always say this, or we say this a lot. We have to dedicate our lives to this. This is foundational. This is what we should be talking about day in and day out. We need a regular staple of this, where we go deeper. And so he says that unless in trying to acquire a lot of wealth or a lot of status, you end up doing something that is impermissible. He says, yes. And again, he's going back and forth. This way it's like, okay, I'm fine. Oh my God, I'm destroying myself. Okay, I think that's okay. Oh my God, he's doing this intentionally, rhetorically. Because what that does is when we realize, okay, I think I'm okay. Oh my God, I'm not okay. Is that it's creating a sense of awareness in us. That we need to think this thing through and to be conscious in what we do. And if you're sincere, even if you lack a little bit of clarity in terms of what you decide to do after going through the process of the sunnah of decision making, where you pray istikhara, the guidance prayer, you consult the right people, you try to think it through yourself, you question the motives, you have a knowledge of the sacred law, and then there's still a little bit of ambiguity, don't hesitate and be decisive. One of the worst things you can do is be decisive. Be decisive, be sincere. And then if you're sincere, even if you're getting it wrong and you make the wrong decision, Allah will save you. Did everyone get that? Even after doing everything I mentioned, did you make the wrong decision? Allah is the most merciful of the merciful. He will likely give you a reward for everything that you did, even though your judgment was off. And He'll open up the door for you to get things right the next time or in the future. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you did what you're supposed to do. And then at very least, you die with making the right intentions. Even if you're the worst person in the world, die making the right intentions. That, Ya Rab, I'm horrible, but that's how I want to be. That's how I want to be. And there's people that are like that are believers, but do everything wrong in the book. But if someone says something bad about the Prophet ﷺ, they can't, anything except that. And these people are close to Allah's mercy. And that person could be closer to Allah's mercy than someone who is the most worshipful, pious people in the minds of people, but they're impressed by themselves and they're showing off in their acts of worship. That's where the ajab al-ajab, the wonders come here. You never know. And so, he says, yes, insiraf al-ham ila si'at al-jam mabda' al-shurur. To be overly concerned about status is the starting point of all evil. Kinsiraf al-ham ila kathrat al-mal. Just as if someone's only concern is money, this is open the door for all evil. وَلَا يَقْدِرْ مُحِبَّ الْجَاء وَالْمَالْ عَلَى تَرْكِ مَعَصِي الْقَلْبِ وَلِسَانُ غَيْرِهِ. He said, the vast majority of people, if that's how they are, will get themselves in trouble and end up committing sins with their hearts and their tongues. So this is the balance here. But again, we have to think of this in relation to the stations of the religion and where people are at. La ilaha illallah. But then, the other way of looking at this, وَأَمَّا سِيعُةِ الْجَامٍ غَيْرْ حِرْصٍ مِنْكَ عَلَى طَلَبِهِ. As for Allah giving you a good reputation and making you very well known, but you're not eagerly holding on to it, nor do you really want it. And you're not concerned even if it was taken from you. He says, this won't harm you. So you don't desire fame, but if Allah makes you famous and well known, As long as you're not desiring it, as long as you're not bothered if it was taken from you. And the same thing is with your wealth. This is the real criterion. If you're saying you're true and seeking that wealth, imagine it being taken from you. What happens? And there was one of the great Imams of the Ba'adi, which was Imam Hussein bin Sheikh Abu Bakr bin Saddam, was extremely wealthy. Extremely wealthy. One of the wealthiest people that lived during his time. And someone came one time and asked him and said that how could you ever have a moment of purity with Allah when you have all this wealth? And he said to him, were I to lose it all in one moment, not a single hair on my body would move, meaning that I wouldn't think twice about it. If everything was taken from me instantaneously, and do this thought exercise. For those of us that have investments in the hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars or even in the tens of thousands, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but what if it was all taken from you? The American dollar collapsed overnight and it was worth nothing. It went from being worth a lot to worth almost nothing. How would we respond? And God forbid that happens. We want everyone to prosper and to be well off and so forth, but do the thought exercise. What if everything was taken from you? All your wealth and everything. And oftentimes, this is what happens sometimes to people towards the end of their lives. Allah creates a fitna. Someone responds in a certain way. Other people don't understand what their intentions are. They make assumptions and think that the person is not who they always thought they really, and then the reality behind it is that person is totally sincere between them and Allah, and they had to go through that for the very end of their life to attain a high degree of closeness to Allah that could not be attained except through that tribulation. And to see who are they doing this all for? Is it for those people or is it for Allah? And if it's for Allah, khalas. And then people will see Yawm al-Qiyamah like, oh, I said that about Fulan? Look where he is. That's how he got there. It was from how people saw that person. And so he says that who had more status than the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Who had more status? His name's written on the throne. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. It was on the tongue of Adam alayhi salam, on the tongue. To the extent that some scholars say that the dowry of Adam to Eve was salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Jannah expands with mentioning him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Who had more status than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And then there's a whole long list of other things. But khalas, he was an abd khalis, that a servant that was completely that in the worship of his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he wasn't harmed by that. Nor were the Khulafa Rashideen, the four rightly guided caliphs. And really they were five, was Sayyidina Hassan bin Ali. Nor were the great Sahaba, the scholars of the Sahaba. Nor were the great Imams of Hadith. Nor were the great Imams of Fiqh. Nor were the great Imams of the other sciences. Is that they were very well known in their time and then after their time. But it didn't harm them because of how they were with Allah. That's why it's inconceivable for us to have a particular way that we serve, to do that service without having the right state of heart. What al-fiqh al-batin does for you, what tasawwuf does for you, tazkiyah, ihsan does for you, is that it helps establish your connection to your Lord. Everybody needs it. In reality, every moment of their life. And so forth and so on. So I know we need to close here, so let me figure out how we're going to wrap this up. As for someone who shows off in worship, whether they're giving charity, whether they're praying, whether they're fasting, whether they're going to Hajj, or whatever it is, this is different. And there are degrees here to which that people then show off. And this is probably a good stopping point because the next session is about the degrees of ostentation. Just bear with me to see if there's anything that I want to say here to wrap our discussion up here. Okay, I think this is a lot is going to be covered in the next session. I think this is a good place to stop. So to recap, what riya really is to associate partners with Allah in acts of worship. In other words, what does that mean to associate partners with Allah? Where you regard people and want them to know what it is that you did, to be aware of it and praise you for it, such that it gives you standing with them. And you develop status wherein which that you benefit in a worldly sense. And then what he's going to do in the next section is, when we talk about his degrees, there are people who just outright, the only intention that they make is one of ostentation, showing off. And then there are people that have that happen before they act. There are other people that have that happen is that as they enter into the act. The other people have that happen as they're in the act, and some people it happens after the act. And then there's degrees of strength. Sometimes people are 75% motivated with sincerity, 25% motivated through riya and ostentation. And this is the next discussion is, after we know what riya really is, it doesn't relate to worldly affairs, but what we said is that when we show off with worldly things, there's times where it's permissible. There's times where you could get reward for it, and then there's times where it becomes blameworthy. It depends on our intention and what it is that we do. But really riya is through worship that is supposed to only be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that we associate that others with Him in wanting the approval of people. This is a good place to stop. We ask Allah Jalla Jalaluhu for tawfiq and to give us understanding and bless us with awareness of our heart, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, and what transpires therein. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala show us that our faults in a way that Ya Arhamar Rahimin is gentle and easy for us, and we ask Him to purify us completely and to have our motivation only be to draw near to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala and to realize our servitude before Him and to worship because He, Jalla Jalaluhu, deserves to be worshipped. Being motivating out of love for Him and longing to see Him subhanahu wa ta'ala and completely relying upon Him, not anything that we do, and His mercy and His bounty, not anything that comes from us. Ya Arhamar Rahimin. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding and to purify us completely from the love of mal and of ja and of all of the other desires that could potentially lead us astray, and to have it all be regulated within us so that everything that we do is solely for His sake subhanahu wa ta'ala, and completely purify us from all vices and adorn us with all virtues, such that we move up in the ranks of closest to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.